Spring football is changing fast and maybe not in a good way. Some of the biggest programs in the country are getting rid of it completely. Is this the future for Clemson? We'll talk about it right now on Locked On Clemson.
You are Locked On Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Tiger fans? Morgan Thomas here, Clemson fan, Clemson grad, host and producer of Locked On Clemson, and part-time host and producer over on 105.5 and 97.5 FM, The Roar, the Clemson flagship station. You can listen to me there typically every Thursday morning over on the Mickey Plyler Show, where we talk all things Clemson football, basketball, baseball, softball, whatever it may be. And as you probably have seen through the past couple of videos and podcasts that I've put out, I like to talk a little bit about baseball, softball, men's basketball, but Clemson football as well, since it's the off season, getting a little bit into recruiting too. So hopefully you're enjoying your time here on Locked On Clemson. Thanks for making Locked On Clemson your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're new to the show, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you have it over on YouTube, so you don't miss an episode. I put out new content every single week, and that's the idea of Locked On Clemson, put out Clemson content for you Monday through Friday every single week. So don't forget to follow me over on X at the Morgan T Show, where you can get more Clemson coverage and, see my usual antics and talk to me throughout the week as well. I love to get your thoughts and opinions over there. All right, today we're going to talk the spring game. I thought this was some interesting information that I'm seeing from other teams around the country about the spring games and the fact that they're really not going to play them, or if they are going to play them, they're going to do something completely different. So I want to give you my thoughts there. Also, Clemson basketball has just 4 games left. We'll look at what the rest of their season looks like, what the competition in the ACC looks like with Louisville and Duke, and can Clemson win the ACC regular season title? I know that everybody asks me that like every single day. Does Clemson still have a chance? Does Clemson still have a chance? And the short answer to that is, well, yes, they have a chance, and we'll talk about it. And then finally, we'll wrap up the show with something quick because we have a baseball game this afternoon. Highly touted freshman lefty takes the mound for baseball this afternoon against Winthrop. Who is Brendon Bennett? We'll look a little bit about him and get excited for the game coming up, because this is kind of a tune-up game, a keep them going game, keep them warm for the big matchup this weekend against South Carolina, where they travel the state to beat the Gamecocks, hopefully, and sweep the Gamecocks. But, you never really know with the rivalry game. Before we get into all that, let's talk about the spring game, and that's topic number 1. Clemson fans, I don't really know how I feel about this. Are spring games becoming a thing of the past? Well, as I mentioned earlier, several big-time college football names and teams are deciding to go a different way and forego their traditional spring game in 2025, opting for something a little bit different, a different kind of approach, maybe not even just a different kind of approach. Some are opting to just not do it at all. And it seems to be a trend with some of the elite teams in college football, and it could change the way you think about or the way you view your team, your favorite team in the spring. And it really kind of comes down to a few different things. I really don't think there's any shock behind all of the reasons why they're maybe opting out of this. But, we always complain about players opting out of bowl games and things like that. But now we've got teams that are canceling or modifying, or if you will, opting out of their spring game. So I think it's really interesting to see what is happening in college football. And there are a few big names that I wanted to kind of throw out. And before I do that, let's think about the Clemson spring game real quick. I'll give you 2 thoughts, I guess. One is that I kind of fell out of love with the spring game for a while, because I felt like Dabo Swinney's original approach was more split 50-50, have a fantasy draft of 2 teams between your coaches, and they were really even, but they were even to kind of like a flaw, like neither team was really any better than the other team because they were so even. And there weren't enough stars on each side of the ball to kind of get things going. And you really didn't feel like it was very cohesive, I guess is the right word. Just the teams didn't play very well together because your quarterback didn't have his star wide receivers or his favorite player. And then on the other side, your defense didn't have all their players. So it's just kind of a patchwork hodgepodge of the spring game. Not only that, the second reason why I hate the spring game is because it's so freaking hot. I mean, I do not like to sit in a game where they're just kind of going through the motions. It's a mixed match of a team, a roster, and then I'm going to burn up while I watch the game. So those are the reasons why I kind of checked out of the spring game. But in recent history, the past couple of years, I've liked how Dabo has kind of changed it up. He made an effort to really go ones versus ones and twos versus twos. And that, to me, made for much more exciting viewing experience for the fan. And I felt like it also helped the players kind of build some confidence. Now, I said going into the spring game last season that the number one thing you want is for Cade Klubnik to have a monster game and to have a lot of confidence. And you just want to throw deep balls and just even tell Wes Goodwin, hey, Wes, call a bad coverage on this one. Call the wrong coverage and let Cade just air it out. Well, they seem to do the complete opposite of that. They had Cade have some of the worst passes and the worst decisions. And it just really, even though it was teed up for him, it really didn't go well for him in the spring game. Now, thankfully, that was just the spring game. A lot of fans would say, well, it's just the spring game. It's not that big a deal. And I guess if you really think about it, Clemson was just fine, even though Cade didn't have a great spring game. And Trent Pierman never saw the field, really. So what is really a spring game telling you or not? I don't know. So one of the big teams that is on the list that I have is Texas. Steve Sarkisian saying that they're going to go to an NFL-style OTA, organized team activity, instead of a traditional game. And when I really say that out loud, I really hate that. An NFL-style OTA. When I've gone to the camps and I don't know if this is exactly the same, but when I've gone to the Panthers camps at Wofford, I didn't like them because, the players are just kind of going through the motion. They're wearing their pad. They're not wearing their pads. They're wearing shorts and t-shirt. So I don't know if they're really going to be checked in and involved, and how hard are they going to be running these things, and what is the real viewership quality of this? Because when you look at it, like these spring games went to being not televised to now being televised, and then to having like barely half the stadium, and now to like a lot of times they were, at one point we were competing to see who could have the biggest spring game, and then teams were having like concerts and all this kind of stuff that was really awesome. But now it's like, nah, with the way that the schedule is now, and Steve Sarkisian's not wrong. I mean, they're playing more games than they ever have before, and they're going to continue to play more games. And as I mentioned in prior podcasts, they're going to keep adding more games to their schedule, is from what we can tell. So I can understand where you would want to protect your players from a long football season, especially if you're going to do that longer and longer. And that's what they're really getting paid for, is that. So I don't know how I feel. I would say OTAs, I don't like that as much, because the viewer, the fan experience, if you're going to do an OTA, for me, I would like to have a fan day, or like to have some fan activities to where we can get involved, or some students can get involved, something like that, to where it's more than just like a pretend game, because Clemson typically views it as a pretend game where they do the Tiger Walk and everything, right? So, I don't know if I really like all that, if they're going to do just the OTA format. I'm curious to see how that's going to work for Texas. I don't blame Steve Sarkisian for doing it. Would it be my choice? Not unless it was like maybe even a full weekend kind of thing, or maybe even a full day kind of thing, where you have players participating or being a part of the fan base throughout the day. That would be kind of cool, because I always love, meeting the players and getting to know them a little better, or getting a picture with them or whatever. My kids love it. My daughter loves it. Kids love it. So I don't hate it, but I don't love it. And then Nebraska's Matt Rule, it says he's most worried about tampering, specifically with the transfer portal. And he's going to just straight up cancel the spring game. There's not going to be a Nebraska Cornhusker spring game at all. Instead, he's going to have closed practices, which is kind of what they already do anyways. I've been to a portion of the closed practices, and they're the same as what I just mentioned. They're kind of like everybody's wearing shorts, maybe pads. They're not going, sometimes they're going full speed. Most of the time they're not. They're kind of doing individual drills and then maybe doing a team drill and then going back. And, for a football fanatic, I think it's pretty cool. For a guy who maybe is a part-time coach or a high school coach, I think that's cool. For a fan in general and the common fan, I don't know if it's really as fun, especially if it's closed and you don't get to see it at all. So, I wouldn't like that at all, because I would like to know if and I assume I assume positive that Nebraska is going to do some sort of fan day instead of this. But he said it was because of other teams now with the games being televised, other teams looking at their team and then tampering and looking to try to find ways to basically poach players off of his team. I never really thought of it that way because, I haven't felt like Clemson has had a superstar player in a spring game in quite some time. But if you did have a player who was a standout that wasn't already a starter, I don't know. Like, to me, I can understand the point being that with college football, it's not just a league of like 32 teams. You've got more than 100 teams and more than say 60 or 70 teams in your area at all levels that have money that are going to try to maybe take that player from you. So while Clemson, you think, oh, well, they're just competing with South Carolina and North Carolina and, they're just competing with Georgia. No, we've seen it now. They're competing with Ohio State. They're competing with Kentucky. They're competing with Georgia Tech. They're competing with Alabama. Of course, they're competing with Central Florida, South Florida. They're competing with teams where you're like, well, Clemson's much better than this team historically, but other teams maybe have some money available, so they'll go after your guys. And that is kind of a frustration as well. I hope that they get to a point where that's not a problem. But right now, with the lawlessness of the transfer portal and the tampering that we know is going on, that's a concern too. Now, I wanted to throw Ohio State. I do, before I get to Ohio State, I do think that Florida State and Missouri on this list, those two teams are teams that they don't have, like they're having stadium renovations. So to me, that makes a little bit more sense. But if it turns into multi-year kind of thing, then I kind of start to scratch my head like, maybe you are just kind of trying to get out of this spring game now. And finally, Ohio State says that, with them going to the national title, they don't have enough time to recover. I don't really know how I believe that either, because, these guys, you're talking about April, you played in January. How long does a 20-something-year-old young man need to recover? I don't know. I think that's a little bit pushing it a little bit for me. But again, if you're not going to do it, I guess the first thing I'd like is the 1v1s. That's what I'd really like from a fan perspective. Then the next thing would be an OTA with a really good fan day. And then the next thing would be, I would say at least that would be my minimum. I wouldn't want to cancel at all. So, but I do understand injuries too also play a case. I get very nervous when it comes to like tackling, rolling up on players. Real hits cause real injuries. And a lot of times it's hard to see the risk and reward there, especially you have a position group that is, the depth is not there. With the longer seasons coupled in there too, that's a big problem. And then the money part of it as well. The spring game does cost a lot of money for the university and for the staff and the security and preparation and everything. And unless you get it televised, you're not making as much money. Most of the big teams are getting it televised. So, but to me, I think I'd like to have something rather than nothing. And I think, they really need to really reset and think about their fans if they're not going to do anything, not even a fan day. I did not look far enough to see if they're doing a fan day, but at least we know that there's some teams that are not going to do a spring game. And I'd venture to say if they're not going to do a spring game, they probably won't ever go back to it. Think about this way too, man, just 10 years ago, the spring game, maybe was like one side filled up, right? And everybody just sitting in the shade. Now you got a spring game. You got to a point where Clemson was like trying to fill up the entire stadium for the spring game. So I think it would be a big mistake if you don't take advantage of that. Even though it is free to get in, I think that there is a lot of fan engagement and excitement. And it is also a recruiting event for Clemson to be able to bring young players in and from the high school ranks and see what Clemson is all about. They get that kind of sense of what it's like to be a player and what a game day is like. Then it kind of shows them a glimpse into what the tradition is and what they could possibly be as a Clemson football player. All right, hey, coming up next, Clemson basketball is on the rise, and they're going to still have a chance for the ACC title. A lot of people are asking me, can they still win it? And we'll talk about it. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, it's easy, and it keeps every game exciting. I like Taco Tuesdays because Prize Picks offers weekly promotions where you can get discounted player projections and get even more bang for your buck value, baby. Download the app today and use Locked On College to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code Locked On College for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, segment number 2, I wanted to get into Clemson basketball. Can Clemson win the ACC regular season championship? They are on the verge of history if they do so. The Tigers right now are ranked 13th in the AP poll, sitting at 22-5 overall, 14-2 in the ACC, and are just 1 game behind Duke for first place in the conference. Now, when you look at the conference standing, they are tied with Louisville, who is also 14-2 in the conference and 1 game behind Duke. Now, Louisville, technically, you would probably say is ahead of Clemson because they have the head-to-head. And as we mentioned before, Clemson has beat Duke. Duke has beat Louisville. Louisville's beat Clemson. So round and round we go. What needs to happen for Clemson to win the ACC? Well, we could talk about what all the other teams could do. We could go down Duke's schedule in the remaining 4 games. We could go down Louisville's schedule and their games remaining. We could go down Clemson's schedule, and that's the one that matters the most. Clemson must win out and beat the 4 remaining teams that they have on their schedule. They've got to beat Notre Dame on the 26th tomorrow. They've got to beat Virginia, travel there this weekend, and then they've got to go to Boston College. So the 2 road games back-to-back, and then Virginia Tech to finish the season off. So what that means is, while Clemson is not in control of their own result, they still have to win the games that are controllable games for them, which is the games that are on their schedule. Now, thankfully, those games that we mentioned are very winnable games. I don't think that they're going to have much of a problem with those teams, but you never know. So Clemson cannot have a game where they slip up. They have to be focused on all these teams, and I think they're playing really good basketball right now. Each player is shining in their own right, and they have to continue that. I love the lineup that they have with both Hunter brothers out on the court, and I like right after this weekend, Zachary is stepping up. Victor Locken stepping up, Chase Hunter stepping up. So you have a bunch of guys that are really hot right now, and I hope they continue that through the rest of the season. Main thing is to stay healthy. Main thing is to get through the end of the season without having a bunch of dumb losses. But you want to, and you should, finish the season with 4 wins to finish the regular season. Now that puts you in an opportunity to have a 3-way tie. It also puts you still in that opportunity to win the ACC regular season title. Duke is still 1 game ahead of them. And Duke, really, when you look at their schedule, doesn't have a ton that kind of scares you. Miami is an absolute horrible team. Wake Forest, possibly, or I forgot Florida State. That's another team, not going to beat him. Wake Forest is one of the better teams in the ACC, but not a one that you would really think would challenge Duke. And then finally, North Carolina. You could say that North Carolina is really down this year, and they are, but they're an average team in the ACC, which is kind of weird to say. But when it comes to a rivalry game, you really never know what you're going to get. So to me, the biggest chance that Clemson has for jumping Duke in the rankings is the very last game of the season for Duke to lose against North Carolina. Now, Louisville is the other team that they're tied up with. Louisville's got to take a step back. And it's going to be, I think, the hardest part for them because of that three-way tie. Louisville has a head-to-head win. When you look at all of the scenarios and the wins against common opponents and the best win against common opponents, to me, it shakes down to if there's a three-way tie, Louisville wins out and gets the number one seed or the regular season title. Louisville has to travel to Virginia Tech. I think might be a little bit of a challenge, but definitely a winnable game for them. Pittsburgh as well, winnable game for them. Another maybe a challenge. California, not going to be a challenge for them, I don't think. And then Stanford, maybe. But to me, Louisville is going to not have much to go through for the last 4 games of the season. But really, when you take it on the outside looking in, what are the other podcasters saying about Louisville and Duke? What are the Duke podcasters saying? What are the Louisville podcasters saying? They're saying the same things that we're saying here on Locked on Clemson. They're saying we just need to focus on what's in front of us. We need to win the games in front. We cannot have a slip-up game. We cannot let another team jump us. Clemson's just saying it in a little bit different way. We can't have a slip-up game so that the other teams can have a slip-up game and we jump them. Just a little bit different. Is it going to be a little bit of luck in there? Yeah, I think so, for sure. There's no doubt about it. But why would this be huge for Clemson overall? Well, winning the ACC regular season title would give Clemson the number one seed in the tourney. I mean, you're talking about, if you're looking at seeding, maybe playing like a middle of the road ACC team that's definitely beatable, like Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, Florida State, something like that. And then you're going to play like maybe a Wake Forest, an SMU again, possibly even a North Carolina. Who knows how it all shakes down. And then you'd have your final game against Duke or Louisville. And that could be your redemption matchup against Louisville. It could be your prove it matchup against Duke to show that the first game wasn't a fluke. So Clemson has a good shot to get deep into the ACC tournament. And they still have that outside looking in opportunity to make it and win the regular season of the ACC. But this really shows even more proof. And it seems like right now, Clemson needs all the proof they can get because the national talking heads don't seem to really, even after having, I think, 10 or so double digit quad 1 wins, quad 2 wins, it still doesn't really matter, it seems like, for Clemson because they're not in the right conference, which, go figure. That's happening in college football and it's happening in college basketball now, it seems. The ACC is no longer the twinkle in the eye of the experts out there. But Clemson is typically a football school, but Brad Brownell has shown that he can build a basketball team. Really, it's kind of shocking how far Brad Brownell has done a 180. There were a lot of talk about just getting rid of him, moving on to someone else. He is what he is. He's reached his ceiling, and there's no more to it. And just when you thought he was down for the count, he comes back and he builds a team that can get him to the Elite Eight, and he builds another team that we think could get him deep into the NCAA tournament again. So Brad Brownell, he really needs to be studied in how he's building these teams and using the transfer portal. It's been great to see. The more ways that Clemson can prove that they're legit, well, it goes back to just doing what you have to do in front of you, which is win the games in front of you. So one game at a time, one quarter at a time if you have to, or one half at a time rather, and take it day by day to be able to get deep into the tournament. And when it comes to tournament, I really don't speculate early on till we have what our matchup is, because tournament basketball, as you know, is just so much different than anything else. It's really hard to say what your team can and can't do against the opponent, because matchups could really make or break how far you can go in the tourney. The higher the seed, the better, though. That's for sure, to at least get a matchup that is on paper more favorable than than not. So, all right. Still some hope for Clemson basketball. A lot to talk about. Continuing the excitement throughout the rest of the season. Just a few games left. While baseball and softball continue going this week, we're going to finish it up with some baseball talk, talking about a freshman pitcher who's making his debut this afternoon. All right, Tiger fans, let's talk about Clemson baseball. The Tigers are having a great start to the season, 6-1, ranked 13th in the country, and off to a strong start. This afternoon, they bring in a freshman lefty who takes the mound for the very first time. Brendon Bennett, 6'2", left-handed pitcher from Novi, Michigan, originally committed to Michigan, but flipped to Clemson after Eric Bakich took the job. Fastball in the low to mid 90s with really, sharp curveball and a changeup. He was a state champion in high school with a 1.44 ERA and 45 strikeouts in 34 innings. What can we expect from Bennett? Well, I think this is still just his first start. So, don't beat him up too bad if it goes south. And I worry a little bit about this game just because it is leading up into the big games this weekend, the big series against South Carolina, the Travel the State series where they go to Clemson and Columbia and Greenville, and they try to take home the state championship in bragging rights from South Carolina. So they could be looking ahead to the weekend. But I think it's good and it's exciting to see what Coach Bakich is doing to get these new guys in there early. And this is a guy who could be the future ace of the team, a future star in the pitching rotation, a future starter, a regular starter for the Tigers. And hey, why not go ahead and get this guy out there early, see what he can do, get him a little bit into a stressful situation in his first start, but not too bad of an opponent. Winthrop's not a world beater by any means, 4-3, but their coach is a former coach of the USC Upstate who has beaten Clemson in the past last season. So it's not that the coach doesn't know how to kind of work his way around an Eric Bakich team, but Clemson, I think this would be a good tune-up for, or a good at least starting position for Brendon Bennett, and to see what he can do. If he performs well, guess what? You've got another pitcher that you kind of feel pretty confident in. I mean, if you look at his ranking overall, 319th player, 35th best left-handed pitcher ranked nationally according to Perfect Game. He's also was the 5th best player and number 2 best left-hander in the state of Michigan. So he's obviously a highly rated guy. First team All-State selection and a contributor to his state championship team. And as I mentioned, 1.44 ERA, 45 strikeouts in 34 innings. And he was also a two-way guy. Batted 373, 5 home runs, 8 doubles, and 31 RBIs. Now, I don't expect him to kind of do that. If you take a look at his pitching arsenal, you could expect a fastball between 85 and 93 miles an hour. You can expect a curveball, a really sharp, drop curveball, 65, 68. That to me is going to throw you off as a batter. And then he throws a changeup in there about 72, 73. So I really like what I see from his pitching. Not a ton of pitches there, but I like what I see from his speeds because he can get you off balance as a batter, and you really don't know what to expect. And that kind of leads to that large amount of strikeouts that you saw, more than one per inning. So we'll see what he can do as he steps up into the college ranks, because there's still a lot of unknowns there. I don't want to give the guy a lot of pressure or overhype him at all. He wasn't a guy I had originally on my radar as one of the top freshmen to start the season out. I had some other guys that I was looking at. So I'm curious to see what you thought about this guy, or if you had him on your radar as well. But we'll have to see what he does to this afternoon, 4 p.m. Hopefully you watch this podcast or listen to this podcast and then go check it out this afternoon and watch the game as you get ready for this big matchup this weekend against South Carolina. It's pretty awesome, pretty excited. I hope you enjoyed the show today. We talked a little bit about football and the spring game and some basketball, and then finished it up with some baseball. So thank you so much. If you missed any of my past episodes, go check those out as well, wherever you listen to podcasts or over on the YouTube channel. I appreciate all the love and support. And follow me over on X at The Morgan T Show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Schott and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March to be the most informed college basketball fan now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, Tiger fans, I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll see you at the top of the hill.